casual glance across a crowded park revealed a total stranger who was the living, breathing mirror image of her 7-year-old son. Billionaire CEO Victoria Sterling believed her empire and family were perfectly secure until one terrifying question to this mysterious single dad unraveled a devastating, decade-long lie. Victoria Sterling did not believe in coincidences. As the founder and CEO of Sterling Cross Enterprises, a sprawling real estate and tech conglomerate worth an estimated $4.2 billion, she built her life on absolute, unyielding control. She controlled the Manhattan skyline with her skyscrapers. She controlled her board of directors with a quiet, lethal grace. And she meticulously controlled her private life. There was only one person in the world who could bypass the steel walls of Victoria's heart, her 7-year-old son, Harrison. Harrison was the beautiful, chaotic center of her meticulously ordered universe. He was an incredibly unique-looking child, possessing a striking physical anomaly, heterochromia iridum. His left eye was a piercing, icy blue, while his right was a deep, earthy hazel. He also had a sharp widow's peak and a tiny, pale birthmark shaped like a crescent moon resting perfectly on his left collarbone. Victoria had always attributed these striking features to the anonymous, premium genetic donor her late husband, David Croft, had supposedly sourced when they turned to surrogacy. Years ago, a brutal battle with cervical cancer had left Victoria unable to carry a child. Her eggs had been harvested prior to the hysterectomy, and David, a charismatic but fiercely private venture capitalist, had insisted on taking the reins of the surrogacy process to spare Victoria the emotional toll. He handled the clinic, the paperwork, and the secretive private appointments. When David brought a newborn Harrison home to their penthouse 7 years ago, Victoria's life finally felt complete. 3 years later, David died instantly in a private helicopter crash in the Swiss Alps, leaving Victoria as a single mother. Since then, it was just her and Harrison against the world. It was a crisp, brilliant Tuesday afternoon in October when the illusion cracked. Victoria had cleared her afternoon schedule, a rare occurrence, to take Harrison to the conservatory water in Central Park. The air smelled of roasted peanuts and drying leaves. Her 2 plainclothes security guards, Miller and Barnes, lingered 50 feet back, blending invisibly into the crowd of tourists and nannies. Harrison was kneeling at the edge of the pond, intensely focused on steering his remote-controlled mahogany sailboat. Suddenly, a rogue gust of wind sent the toy veering off course, wedging it firmly into a thick cluster of reeds near the stone embankment. "Mum, it's stuck!" Harrison called out, his shoulders slumping. Before Victoria could close the distance, a man sitting on a nearby bench stood up. He was dressed casually in a faded denim jacket, a thick grey sweater, and dark jeans. Beside him sat a young girl, perhaps 9 years old, quietly reading a paperback book. "I've got it, buddy," the man said. His voice was a rich, warm baritone. He crouched down, easily reaching over the water to dislodge the boat, handing it back to a beaming Harrison. "Thank you," Victoria said, stepping forward, slipping her designer sunglasses down to the bridge of her nose. "That was very kind of you. We would have been out here all day trying to—" The man turned around. Victoria stopped dead in her tracks. The breath was violently knocked from her lungs, as if she had walked headfirst into a sheet of invisible glass. She stared at the stranger. Her heart began to hammer, a frantic, sickening rhythm against her ribs. It wasn't just a passing resemblance. It was a genetic carbon copy. The man standing in front of her had the exact same auburn hair, sweeping back into an identical, sharp widow's peak. He had the same strong, square jawline. But what made the blood freeze in Victoria's veins were his eyes. The man looking back at her had one piercing, icy blue eye, and one deep, earthy hazel eye. Statistical impossibility. The phrase flashed through Victoria's analytical mind like a warning siren. The odds of a stranger sharing that exact hair, that exact facial structure, and the exact same rare heterochromia as her son were astronomical. Victoria's instincts, the same ruthless instincts that allowed her to dismantle rival corporations, flared instantly. She didn't see a helpful stranger. She saw a breach in her security. She saw the anonymous donor from the Whitaker Institute who had somehow broken his ironclad non-disclosure agreement. He had tracked them down. He was staging a coincidental meeting to extort a billionaire. The man offered a polite, somewhat confused smile, noticing her intense stare. "It's no problem at all. The wind is pretty tricky off the water today." He turned back toward his daughter. "Come on, Chloe. Let's go get those pretzels." "Wait," Victoria commanded. The authority in her voice was absolute, stopping the man in his tracks. Miller and Barnes, sensing the shift in their employer's tone, subtly closed the distance, standing rigidly 10 feet away. The man turned back, his brow furrowing. "Can I help you, Mum?" Victoria took a slow, measured step forward, positioning herself slightly in front of Harrison, shielding the boy. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "How much is Whitaker paying you? Or did you track us down yourself to try and secure a payout? Because I promise you, I have lawyers who will tie you up in litigation until you don't have a cent left to your name." The man blinked, genuinely baffled. He looked at her, then at the two imposing men in suits hovering nearby. "Whitaker. Look, lady, I don't know what you're talking about, or who you think I am. My name is Thomas Hayes. I teach AP English at a high school in Queens. I'm just here with my daughter." "Don't play games with me," Victoria snapped, losing her legendary composure. She pointed a trembling finger at his face. "Why does my son look exactly like you?" Thomas Hayes let out a dry, incredulous laugh, but it died in his throat as his gaze shifted past the furious billionaire and landed squarely on the 7-year-old boy holding the wooden boat. Until this moment, Thomas had only looked at the boy fleetingly. Now, he truly looked. The color drained from Thomas's face so fast, he looked as though he might faint. The cardboard cup of coffee he was holding slipped from his fingers, hitting the concrete with a wet slap, splashing hot liquid across his boots. He didn't even flinch. Thomas's breathing hitched. His heterochromic eyes widened, locking on to Harrison's identical pair. He saw the hair. He saw the subtle, familiar tilt of the boy's nose, a nose that looked exactly like the one his daughter, Chloe, had when she was that age. "Oh my God," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking. He took a stumbling step forward. Miller and Barnes instantly stepped between Thomas and the boy, their hands resting subtly over the concealed weapons beneath their jackets. "Step back, sir," Miller warned, his voice low and threatening. "Don't touch him," Victoria barked, pulling Harrison firmly behind her. "I knew it. You are the donor. You violated the contract." Thomas stammered, ignoring the guards, his eyes still frantically scanning the boy's terrified face. "I didn't donate anything, I swear to you. I've never been to a sperm bank in my life." "Then explain this," Victoria hissed, gesturing to the undeniable, living proof of their shared DNA. "You expect me to believe this is a coincidence?" Thomas dropped to his knees, right there on the pavement, completely disregarding the mud and spilled coffee. He looked up at Victoria, his eyes welling with sudden, desperate tears. "Mum, please, I need you to answer one question. Please, I'm begging you." Victoria hesitated. The man wasn't looking at her with the calculated greed of a blackmailer. He was looking at her with the raw, shattered agony of a grieving father. "Make it quick," she said coldly. Thomas swallowed hard, his voice shaking. Does your boy have a birthmark?" "Right here." Thomas pointed a trembling finger to his own left collarbone. "Shaped like a tiny pale crescent moon." Victoria felt the earth drop out from beneath her. The ambient noise of Central Park, the laughing children, the rustling leaves, the distant traffic, suddenly faded into a deafening, static ringing in her ears. How could he know that? The birthmark was rarely visible. It was always covered by Harrison's shirts. No one knew about it except her late husband, and Harrison's pediatrician. "How do you know that?" Victoria breathed, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Thomas let out a ragged sob, burying his face in his hands for a fraction of a second before looking back up. "Because I'm not an anonymous donor, lady," Thomas said, his voice laced with years of buried trauma. 7 years ago, my wife, Sarah, gave birth to twins at St. Jude's Medical Center. It was a complicated delivery. She hemorrhaged. She died on the operating table. Thomas pointed to the little girl on the bench, who was now watching the scene with wide, frightened eyes. Chloe was the firstborn. She survived. But the doctor came out an hour later. He looked me in the eye and told me my son's lungs had collapsed. He told me my baby boy didn't make it. I buried an empty, sealed casket because they told me his remains were too traumatic to view. Thomas rose slowly to his feet, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with a mixture of rage and desperate hope as he stared at Victoria. "I didn't donate a damn thing. Who the hell gave you my son?" The words hung in the crisp autumn air like a physical blow. Victoria stumbled backward, the heel of her boot catching on the pavement. Miller caught her by the elbow, steadying her, but Victoria couldn't feel his grip. She couldn't feel anything. Her mind aggressively raced back in time, tearing through the pristine memories of her marriage to David. She remembered David's insistence on handling the surrogacy. "You're closing the European acquisition, Victoria? Let me take this burden off your shoulders. I found a private specialist, highly discreet." She remembered how David never allowed her to attend the ultrasounds with the supposed surrogate, claiming the agency strictly forbade contact to protect the carrier's privacy. She remembered the day David came home, pale but smiling, holding a newborn Harrison wrapped in a hospital blanket that bore no logo. The surrogate delivered early, David had told her. It was complicated, but he's here. He's ours. Victoria had assumed Harrison was created from her harvested eggs and a donor's sperm because David had confessed months earlier to being sterile. But if this man, Thomas Hayes, was telling the truth, a horrifying realization paralyzed her. If Harrison was Thomas's stolen child, then her harvested eggs were never used. David hadn't found a surrogate. David had somehow tapped into a black market adoption ring. He had bought a child who had been declared dead to his real father, all to give his billionaire wife the perfect family she demanded, and to ensure he didn't lose his place in her empire. "Mommy, why is that man crying?" Harrison tugged at Victoria's cashmere coat, his identical eyes looking up at her with innocent concern. Victoria looked down at the boy she had raised, the boy she loved more than her own life, the boy she had spent 7 years believing was biologically half hers. Then she looked back at Thomas Hayes, a broken man who had mourned a son who was currently standing 3 feet away from him. The billionaire CEO, a woman who controlled global markets with a wave of her hand, felt her entire reality shatter into a million jagged pieces. "Miller!" Victoria choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "Call the cars around. Now. She reached into her designer handbag with trembling fingers, pulling out a solid black business card embossed with silver text. She stepped past her guards and pressed it firmly into Thomas's hand. "Mr. Hayes," Victoria said, her eyes hollow, fighting to maintain a sliver of her composure. "My husband handled the adoption, the surrogacy. He died 3 years ago. If what you are saying is true, if my husband did this..." She stopped, choking on a sob she violently swallowed down. She looked at Thomas with terrifying, absolute resolve. "If he did this, I am going to tear apart every hospital, every doctor, and every lie until we find the truth. You are coming with me." The interior of Victoria's armored Maybach was a tomb of suffocating silence. In the trailing SUV, Harrison and Chloe were being watched over by Miller and Victoria's trusted nanny, happily eating the pretzels Thomas had promised, blissfully unaware that the tectonic plates of their existence were violently shifting. In the lead car, Thomas sat rigidly opposite Victoria, his hands gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles were white. Victoria was already on the phone.